there are some pretty awesome regenerative practices specific to almonds. And I'm thinking of one orchard in particular that I know, and they're actually grazing 5 different species of animals on their orchard. Um, and it's pretty awesome. They bought this orchard. It was conventional 2 years ago, and it had a huge infiltration problem. There was like a lake on a good quarter of their acreage, and it just wouldn't go in the ground. And so they started doing this grazing, 5 different species of animals, and they started doing um, letting plants grow in between the rows, not spraying tons of chemicals. And before you know it, they were one of the research orchards in the Ecdysis study, and they found that this orchard now, after less than 2 years, had more than 2x the average infiltration rate of like a typical regenerative orchard, because what they're doing is like so far above and beyond even like the average regenerative orchard. So they're even doing things that are absolutely revolutionary. For example, harvesting, they're using above ground harvesters. So typically what happens with almonds is you go around with tree shakers and you actually grab the tree and shake them and all the nuts fall off. And then you have, before you do that, you have to basically clear the ground. So for organic orchards, they're either mowing that or they're flame weeding it in order to get the ground bare so that you can then drive street sweepers through and pick all the nuts up. Or for conventional, they're spraying all kinds of chemicals to clear the orchard of cover. And so with the above ground harvester, it's actually an integrated system to where it's basically this thing that drives up to the tree. It wraps these big bat wings around it and then shakes it, and the nuts fall straight into the bat wings and it goes straight into a collector. And so what that does is it means that you don't need to clear all that biomass that you're growing in between your orchard. And so you're continually, sequestering carbon and storing more water because you have green cover year round.
All right, I am so excited. We are joined here today with Tim from Philosopher Foods. Tim, if you want to go ahead and just give us a little bit of an intro of how you got involved with Philosopher Foods and where they're going and all the great things they're doing.
Totally. Well, thanks for having me, Lauren. I love everything that you're doing with regenerative farming. Super important. I personally believe that the best chance that we have at thriving as a species on this planet is by rapid, full-scale adoption of regenerative agriculture globally. So yeah, I started my business Philosopher Foods back in 2013, actually in my home kitchen in Davis, California. And we create a line of craft nut butters. So similar to the way in which there's a big difference between Coors Light and your local craft brewery, we're trying to make that same distinction in nut butter. So what we're doing is we're creating coconut butters, we're creating sprouted almond butters, and then chocolate versions of both. And all of it is being processed in small batches in a stone grinder. So if you can imagine something about this big, you can put your arms around it, and it has black granite wheels inside made of stone and black granite base as well. It basically slowly churns at low speeds, low temperatures, gets the product ground into a fine consistency. And essentially what you're doing is you're preserving the enzymes, flavor, and nutrition of the product that you're grinding by doing it in small batches at low speeds and low temperatures. So we're really trying to bring that artisanal craft back to nut butter, because so much of what's on the market is commercially mass produced, and it's high-speed metal cutting machines, they're oxidizing product, and honestly, they're also making inferior textures because you're not getting proper oil extraction when it's going through this machine thousands of pounds an hour in one end out the other. And so I'm sure if you've had any kind of nut butter that's commercially mass produced, you know that you have to like knife it really hard to like get the oil to seep down into it. And it's a pain in the butt to try to stir it and reintegrate the oils with the fats and the fiber and protein. So when you stone grind it, that's so much less of an issue, because we're actually grinding anywhere between 2 hours for the crunchy and 12 hours for the creamy almond butters. So if you can imagine that much time processing slowly in there, all those oils are properly getting released and integrated and well mixed in the product. And so basically it's a much finer texture that doesn't stick to the roof of your mouth, Doesn't require you to knife it for 15 minutes before eating it. And honestly, I think it tastes way better. It brings out all kinds of flavor nuances that you don't normally get. So when I first learned about all this and started making these products, it was just like, wow, man, this is the best nut butter on the market. We got to get this out there. Friends and family started asking to buy it, and I started making it, started selling it. One thing led to another, and we launched the first cottage food operation in our county. And I had a business, and it's just been growing and growing ever since. And so part of my vision was to teach people about this form of nut butter that's it's higher quality craft nut butter. The other part was teaching people about sprouted food, which makes food more sweeter, more digestible, and more nutritious. And so that was a big part of my mission. But thirdly, being in Davis, California, and having a background in permaculture, I was actually surrounded by almond monocultures. And I would drive anywhere in any direction, and I would have to go through mile after mile of almond monoculture. And, you know, I just became aware pretty keenly of all the problems associated with industrial monocultures, particularly in almonds. And so part of my mission too was to change the way that almonds were grown from being industrial monocultures to being regenerative polycultures. And at the time, you know, 2013, we were still calling it permaculture. We didn't really have the word regenerative quite yet. It was just getting born around that time. But it's the same concept, right? It's modeling our food systems after ecosystems. And so I wanted to create a whole supply chain based on perennial polycultural almond orchards. And that's what we're still up to today, 9 years later.
I love it. And for the people that don't know about the monoculture almond issues, you want to just give some high level things about what's going on. I think everybody kind of knows that we're having a bee problem. And if you could elaborate a little more on exactly what those problems are.
Sure. Yeah. Where to begin? I could talk for an hour on the problems, but I'm going to condense it to like 1 or 2 minutes. Okay. So almonds are the most valuable agricultural commodity in California. There's over 1 million acres planted. And it's also the most heavily sprayed crop in California. So every single year, over 40 million pounds of pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and fumigants are sprayed on almonds every single year in California. And so part of those herbicides, for example, the most heavily sprayed herbicide is glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. Roundup is known to cause cancer in humans. It's known as a carcinogen to the state of California, and it's also known to be lethal to bees. And so what happens is when you're spraying this crazy chemical cocktail on this orchard every single year, constantly throughout the year, when the bees are trucked in droves, literally from all over the world to pollinate the almond orchards, it's the largest human-induced pollination event on the planet. All of these bees are getting trucked in, and as they're doing their great work of pollination to make the almonds be able to bear nuts and fruit, what happens is they get exposed to all like a crazy cocktail of toxic chemicals. Like literally there's at least 6 different of each of those things that I listed: pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, fumigants. There's at least 6 different ones of each of those that are sprayed on the crop. So if you can imagine one of those being lethal to bees, just imagine the synergy of the cocktail. It's insanely lethal. And so what's happening is the comparison is being made that beekeepers, it's like they're sending their bees to war when they go to pollinate in the Central Valley, because literally some beekeepers are losing up to 40% of their brood. And so it's essentially, you know, it's a mass bee killing event, unfortunately, because of how chemically sprayed almonds are. And so the other piece of the puzzle is, so we're creating a toxic system that's killing soil, it's killing bees, it's harmful to the trees, and it's harmful to the humans that are cultivating the trees. We're also seeing chemical residues in the final product. So we've tested conventional almond butters versus organic almond butters. Every single conventional almond butter that we tested had detectable unsafe levels of glyphosate in it, and every single organic one had no detectable levels. So we're also seeing it harm the end consumer. So there's all that. And then the other issue is when you're using that much chemical on a crop, you're killing the soil. And so when you kill the soil can no longer retain water. And so you need to use way more water than you would if you had healthy soil. And so because 99% of the almond crop in California is conventional, that means that the crop is insanely water intensive, right? And so we're seeing, there's been studies that have been done that have shown that they're using up to 3.2 gallons of water per almond on some of these conventional orchards. We know from peer-reviewed research from the Ecdysis Foundation, on the other hand, that regenerative almond orchards, when you create just 1% of soil organic matter, you actually create the ability to store 20,000 gallons of water. And that's for every 1% increase in soil organic matter. So when we farm regeneratively, we are increasing soil organic matter. We're increasing insect biomass. We're increasing soil microbiology. All of this has been studied and quantified by the Ecdysis Foundation. And so what we're focusing on is taking a data-driven approach to showing the holistic problems of the degenerative system and showing the holistic benefits and holistic solutions of the regenerative system, and trying to get almond farmers in California to adopt regenerative agriculture at scale using data, and understanding that not only is it better for all of life to go from degenerative to regenerative, but actually it's more profitable. The Ecdysis Foundation found that regenerative almond farming is 2 times more profitable on average than conventional. So my question is, why aren't we doing this at scale? And that's what we're trying to work on in our company, is to help move the needle from conventional to regenerative in almonds and all of our ingredients that we use.
Along with just knowing that, that's clearly the best answer, right? We don't want to send the bees off to war. We don't want to keep using quadruple the amount of water basically so knowing that that's the other side, did you find any other benefits from a regenerative product versus a conventional? And of course, we could break that down to organic versus organic regenerative and so on. But in your nut butters as a product, what were kind of the benefits that you found just as a producer for those things?
Sure. Well, as a producer, so currently there are no regenerative organic certified almonds in California. There are several farms that could qualify, but have not yet applied. So, I can speak mostly to organic because we are 100% organic operation. And, I think for me, it's a question of flavor and purity, and also nutrient density. So we haven't fully, like I said, we have tested the chemical contamination of the almonds, and we found glyphosate contamination. Because it's a water soluble chemical, it actually goes up through the roots of the tree when it binds to water. It's water soluble chemical. So it's not that the orchards are spraying these almonds directly with glyphosate. It's that it's on the orchard floor, and then it's ending up going through the roots and the trunk and into the seeds of the tree. So that's one huge difference for me, is like, I know when I'm eating my organic almonds that I'm not exposing myself or my customers to carcinogenic chemicals that disrupt your gut microbiome as well. So that's a huge difference for me, is lack of contamination. Another difference is being able to, we haven't actually tested yet for things like nutrient density. I'm very curious to see if there's a nutrient density difference between conventional and organic. The Ecdysis Foundation looked into that, and they didn't find a huge difference between conventional and organic. But then again, I'm also not aware of what nutrients they were testing for. Like if they were just testing for fat, fiber, protein in your standard nutrition facts, maybe there's not a huge difference. But I would personally believe that there would be a huge difference in micronutrient content, in vitamin content, in omega fatty acid content. But again, that all needs to be studied. And so part of what we're trying to do as Philosopher Foods is our slogan is know thy foods, because if you are what you eat, then knowing your food is knowing yourself. And so we want to know as much as we possibly can about our foods. And so we want to be able to quantify the holistic nutritional profile, as well as the anti-nutrient profile. What kind of, is there phytic acid? Is there tannins, oxalic acid, lectins, other things that we can call anti-nutrients that are present? And how does the cultivation style affect not only nutrients, but also anti-nutrients? And then besides that, we want to quantify the toxins that are present, like the agricultural pollutants, but also toxins like heavy metals, lead, mercury, and other things like mycotoxins, for example, that could potentially be naturally present in the crop or in the soil. So we're basically trying to quantify everything that we can about the food, and we're in the very early stages of that process. We just started with the glyphosate, and we're a small company. We don't have an infinite budget, but if we did, we would be testing all these things, and that's what we're going towards. From a consumer perspective, there are some people that are interested in regenerative, but I would say it's not really at critical mass yet. Most people understand that, care about their bodies, they want to do organic, not conventional, but and regenerative is a buzzword in the industry for like farmers and food producers, but I'm not sure if consumers are fully there yet. So, we're more doing regenerative, like for example, with our coconut, we did get regenerative organic certification for our coconut butters. We're doing that because we know it's the right thing to do, right? Regenerative organic certification it's the most holistic and stringent standard for regenerative agriculture that I'm personally aware of. I know there's at least 6 or 7 different certifications for regenerative ag. But personally, I've just been focused on ROC because, as I said, I believe it has the highest standards, not only for soil health, but also for animal welfare, and finally, social fairness. So making sure that everyone at every part in the supply web is getting fairly paid and well treated. So that was a lot. I'll take a pause and let you reflect.
I was about to say, because it goes in so many directions, right? Like it's this one great benefit, it's this great benefit. And then I like though that we can all come back to, if we understand we're destroying soil and the trees are sucking up the degradation or lack thereof, of course, what they produce is going to suffer as well. To me, that's kind of like the end story is we may not have proof that it's more nutrient dense. We are still working on testing, but we also know that destroying the soil is reducing nutrient density on large scale. So I feel like it's not too far of a hop, skip, and a jump to make those assumptions.
Absolutely.
So you kind of touched on this one already, but do you feel that the customers that are coming to you are connecting to you through the regenerative ag movement? Is it because of the clean quality of the products, or kind of what would you say has really brought people to your specific nut butters?
Well, for us, I mean, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create the most delicious, nutritious, ethical, and ecological nut butters on the market. So essentially, we're trying to create the holistic best product that we can. And I believe we've achieved that. And so, the people that, unfortunately, it's more expensive to produce the products that are the holistic best. But for the people that have the budget for that and do want to invest top dollar in their nourishment, we provide in droves for them. And so when people try our product, it's just night and day different than anything else in the market. It's the sprouting brings out so many flavors and so many micronutrients that aren't normally present when you're eating dormant or roasted seeds. Then the dehydrating, you're not then killing all of that extra nutrition that you've generated through the sprouting. You're just sort of pressing pause by taking the water out at a low heat for a long time. So you're getting all kinds of flavors and nutrients that aren't normally there. And as I said, when you combine that with the superior textures of the stone grinding, it's like a 2D versus 3D thing, right? There's just no comparison between what we do and the mass produced stuff. And so I think the customers are coming to us because we got the most delicious product first and foremost. Like, let's be real. But then, people that do care about the earth and do care about all these other things that we're doing, the fair trade, the ethical and the ecological aspects, I think those are secondary, but also core to what we're doing. And so for the people that are aware of all of it, they feel and acknowledge all of it. And that's why they're like, yes, this is my product.
I love it. And let's go down a side road. I'm sure we could talk for like 3 hours about this, but try to condense it as much as you can. If there are no regenerative almonds, and I'm sure getting regenerative coconut was not super easy either, tell us a little bit about your journey from either finding or converting regenerative sources to even get the products to create the nut butters for you.
Totally. So I'll start with almonds because I'm thinking about it. There are some pretty awesome regenerative practices specific to almonds. And I'm thinking of one orchard in particular that I know, and they're actually grazing 5 different species of animals on their orchard. And it's pretty awesome. They bought this orchard. It was conventional 2 years ago, and it had a huge infiltration problem. There was like a lake on a good quarter of their acreage, and it just wouldn't go in the ground. And so they started doing this grazing, 5 different species of animals, and they started doing letting plants grow in between the rows, not spraying tons of chemicals. And before you know it, they were one of the research orchards in the ecdysis study, and they found that this orchard now, after less than 2 years, had more than 2x the average infiltration rate of like a typical regenerative orchard, because what they're doing is like so far above and beyond even like the average regenerative orchard. So they're even doing things that are absolutely revolutionary. For example, harvesting, they're using above ground harvesters. So typically what happens with almonds is you go around with tree shakers and you actually grab the tree and shake them and all the nuts fall off. And then you have, before you do that, you have to basically clear the ground. So for organic orchards, they're either mowing that or they're flame weeding it in order to get the ground bare so that you can then drive street sweepers through and pick all the nuts up. Or for conventional, they're spraying all kinds of chemicals to clear the orchard of cover. And so with the above ground harvester, it's actually an integrated system to where it's basically this thing that drives up to the tree. It wraps these big bat wings around it and then shakes it, and the nuts fall straight into the bat wings and it goes straight into a collector. And so what that does is it means that you don't need to clear all that biomass that you're growing in between your orchard. And so you're continually, sequestering carbon and storing more water because you have green cover year round. And you're also, I believe, not necessarily, you're just getting a healthier soil is what it comes down to. So they're doing that. And I think that when we move to a regenerative template in almonds, it's going to have to look more like that, because even in the organic systems, you're still having to clear the biomass when you harvest, and you're also still having to worry about not grazing animals for 3 months before harvest because of phytosanitation standards. Whereas if you're doing above ground harvest, the nuts are falling directly into the collector, so it's never touching the ground. So you don't have to worry about what grazed there the couple of months before. So they're, like I said, they're going to be going for regenerative organic certification in the next year once they're certified organic. And the interesting thing is we did have the opportunity to partner with our existing organic supplier this year to get a couple of orchards certified regenerative, but unfortunately they got hit with climate catastrophe. So they had a late freeze in March, and basically it knocked tons and tons of poundage off the crop. So that orchard that would have been certified regenerative actually it fell victim to, I guess you could blame climate change, or you could just blame a freak freeze. But yeah, unfortunately, they are not going to be able to certify their acreage this year because they just don't have crop. As far as coconut goes, we personally didn't do any work with that. We were connected with Dr. Bronner's, and Dr. Bronner's actually set up their own coconut cooperative in Serendipal, or in Sri Lanka, sorry, it's called Serendipal. And basically what they did is they worked with local Sri Lankan people to create a cooperative that would supply organic and fair trade coconut products for their soap company. And when they got into the regenerative thing as well, and they helped the whole co-op get certified regenerative, like we're talking a couple thousand farmers. And basically I have a good relationship with Dr. Bronner's, and they introduced me to their supplier. And as soon as they were certified regenerative, we just started buying their coconut. So for us, it wasn't that hard. Like, we just had to work with the certifier to certify that we were actually buying it and pay a fee to use the regenerative organic certification trademark on our products. But the farmers, they've done all the hard work. They've done a ton of work around setting up social fairness. So they have a ton of different funds that they allocate their fair trade dollars equally throughout their suppliers too. So they're building schools, or they're building water projects for their community. Basically they get the money and they decide what to do with it. And so that's more regenerative than being like, here, you have to do this with our money that we're giving you extra. They get to decide. They're also doing all kinds of cool stuff to close the loop on circular economy. Like, they're reusing all parts of the coconut, they're creating compost, they're creating berms and swales with husks. And of course, they're doing a ton on the ecology front as well. They're grazing cows in between the rows of their orchards, and they're doing all kinds of awesome amendments to their soil. They've created a compost program for all of their growers. They've actually created a loan system for their farmers. So whoever wants to farm regeneratively gets a loan to help implement regenerative practices through a revolving loan fund. It goes on and on and on. So I can't say enough about Dr. Bronner's and this cooperative in Sri Lanka. They've just done great work with setting up regenerative ag.
I love your two paths, because I feel like they bring up two very important points that So ROC and Dr. Bronner's has really worked to pick, specific areas that they can improve the supply chain and have developed regenerative. But as soon as you go outside of that you need almonds, you're kind of in this just where do we source things? And the farmer has all these barriers to certification. And so, we all say, well, why isn't everything regenerative? Why doesn't a farmer just switch tomorrow? And we have to acknowledge like the cost to the farmers, the issues of certification, and there's so much going into it. So I feel like your actual two products really like elevate those two paths, and that you're helping enable the almond farmers to make transitions, because once those almonds are produced, like we have to make sure that somebody is able to buy them or somebody is able to sell them. So I also like that, Philosopher Foods is there to help, that farmer. So that orchard then didn't have to go on to create a whole new product. You were there to step in and be a supporting business. So anything you want to touch on those two paths, since there's a lot of burden on each side, and it's super great that ROC is helping, but any words from the farmer side of it?
Yeah, I think for the farmer, it's always like, what's in it for me, right? It's great to be regenerative, but like, if you're going to go through all this extra work and have all this extra expense, what are you getting from it, right? And so it's pretty easy to see the ecological benefits of regenerative, but if you're spending a ton of extra money to achieve that, then you're not either A, having a buyer, or B, having a buyer who's going to pay you enough money to make all that worth it. Then why, that's great, but why we can't do it, right? It's just not financially viable in California, where land is super expensive to own or lease, and we got to make a business model that works. So, I don't know what that's going to look like yet. Because there's no ROC almonds yet in California or Europe. I would imagine that it's going to make the price of an already expensive crop increase. And, I guess my reply to that is what I always say, which is like, well, what world do you want to live in, and who do you want to be? Because, if you are what you eat, then all you have to do is look at the farm where your food is coming from and being like, do I support that existing on the planet? And do I support that going into my body to become me on a cellular level? And if the answer is no, it's like, well, what are we doing? I'm not going to support that system, even if it's $5 cheaper, right? So it's like, I look at regeneration as an investment. It's an investment in my health, investment in the farmer's health, the soil's health, every living organism's health. And so I'm not sure how to reconcile regeneration with capitalism, because unfortunately, capitalism as we have it doesn't really measure or value all of those non-monetary things. And so it's almost like we need to figure out a way to financially measure and value things like soil health and clean water, clean air, clean food, nutrient density. It's almost like we need to figure out a way to economically value all of those things, so that when we look at the full picture, we realize that actually conventional ag is more expensive because it's causing cancer, pollution, yada, 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 yada. None of that's coming into the equation right now. All we're seeing is, oh, that's $3 a pound, organic's $5 a pound. I'm going to go $3 a pound. So again, I don't have the answers here, but it's going to take a more holistic look at the economy, I think, in order to make regeneration like feasible at scale.
And I think that's a huge, I love to say it's the part of like what makes people who are part of this movement special, because they don't need to be explained why the price difference is there. They can understand it's clean water, clean health, lack of, yeah, what is it? Feed your pharmacist or feed your farmer, whichever the two,
Totally.
So, no, I love it. And I think people have really come to this movement, and yes, we're a little shell shocked at prices originally, but once we get into it and we realize what those things actually cost and what they are, I think that's where we really, develop into it. Which on that side, of course, price would be a barrier to people to coming to the movement, but have you had any consumer education issues that you have faced around the movement?
Well, we're just getting started with actually selling regenerative organic certified products. We literally launched our coconut butters that are ROC last week. So we'll see. But in general, I think, yeah, the number one thing we come up against is price point. It's like, God, why is your nut butter so expensive? I love it, but it's like I can't afford it, And so, even when you explain all the reasons, some people just can't afford it. And that's just the financial reality of it. And I think that's kind of our number one challenge as a business, to be honest, is like, how do we scale this beautiful business that we built into something that is much larger and has much more of a regenerative impact, when making it in this way is so expensive, like both for us and for the consumer. So that's kind of our $1 million question. If anyone listening can answer that, please call me. We have some work to do together.
I was going to have that as a bonus question. If you have any thoughts or ideas around like anything you see coming out of it, I would always say that like getting people to understand value is one thing, but of course there's just the question of it is outside the affordability of some people. But then of course, we can all do CSAs, we can work more locally, we can always get closer to our farmer in some areas. So to me, that's always just getting closer to your farmer is my only way I've found to encourage that. Any other thoughts around that one before we move on? Because that is the $1 million question.
It is. Yeah. I mean, when I met the farmers at that regenerative orchard that I described, it was so awesome because there's such good people. And I'm like, yeah, of course I want to spend double the price or more to support you guys, because wow, you're just such great people and what you're doing is so awesome and impactful in a good way. But I think, it comes back to that quantification thing. Like, okay, so there's this really cool group everyone needs to know about called the Bionutrient Food Association. And basically they're developing a scanner that you can take to the produce aisle in your store and just start scanning produce to see like, how's the nutrient density to this one versus this one versus this one. And if we had that tool available to all of us, then that actually democratizes the food market, because then the consumer is empowered to choose what is actually the healthiest food, right? It doesn't matter what's on the label or what the certifications are. If the food isn't nutrient dense, then, well, why wouldn't you choose the more nutrient dense version? And so I think if we had that scanner that could do that in our nut butters, you would see like, hey, here's a scan of your, commercially mass produced almond butter versus a scan of our product. Look at that nutrient density difference. You actually need to eat 3 jars of that conventional to get the equivalent of 1 jar of ours. So when you look at it that way, our high price is actually lower than the nutrient density difference. You know what I mean? But I can't quantify that yet because we don't have the technology. Like, I don't think his scanners, he hasn't calibrated them for almonds yet. And I don't know if they can go through glass either. So, but we're getting close. Like, I think if Dan and his team keep doing what they're doing, and we keep supporting them to do it, we're going to have a revolutionary shift in the way that food capitalism happens. And I would say a much needed shift to be based on what really is valuable in food.
I love that you bring that up, because we talk about the nutrient density of an apple in the 60s and 70s and the nutrient density of an apple today that I don't remember the exact conversion, but it's that we have to eat like 8 apples to equate to 1 apple previously. So if we talk about consumer consumption, that we're eating almost 8 times the amount that we need to eat to maintain the same nutrient level, much less like you said about the leads, the metals, everything else is insane. And how can we quantify those things? We're super excited for not going to get the name of the device, but we're excited for it to come out to you and start giving proof to nutrient density and all those good things.
Is this the same device, or do you know a different one?
Yeah, there's multiple iterations now. So I'm very excited to see how they come out, because you're right, like calibrating them to all the different things. We hear a lot of them in regards to grass for livestock, that we're growing more nutrient grass to feed livestock. But of course, then apples, almonds, coconuts, all those different things. So we got to calibrate the whole rainbow of different foods.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I will also add that regeneration is catching on even almond industry. Back in February, there was a regenerative almond field day that happened, and over 300 people showed up to an almond orchard to talk about regenerative almonds. And so that included conventional farmers, that included the Almond Board of California, who is sort of the industry face of conventional agriculture. They were all showing up. There was legislators showing up. There was nonprofits, environmental groups. Like, everyone showed up because they all want to know, how do we create a more regenerative almond system? Because I think even the people that are in the conventional system are aware that it has some pretty unsustainable problems. And so even they are curious, like, how do we do this better? You know, and the industry is losing face. Like whenever the industry loses face, they want to pay attention to it because they don't want to lose money. And so when all this bad press is coming about the water and stuff like that, um, I think that they should be and they are motivated to find answers to make it better. And obviously, regeneration is that answer. And so, yeah, how do we create a template that we can sort of impose onto the way that it's done now and sort of shift the whole system at scale in a meaningful way? That's the big question.
I love it. You're asking all the good big questions, right?
No, we're just like, those are the big questions. We're just engaged at like from a small scale, like doing the right things that we know needs to be done and just to show that it can be done. Right. And that's kind of been our take at it. Like we haven't tried to tackle the whole system. We're just trying to like go from organic to ROC. Like that's our little piece. But then even organic is only 1% of the behemoth. And so it's like, yeah, we're just one little player in this huge food system trying to do things right.
Yeah, and just for scale for people who may not know, if organic is 1%, so organic regenerative is, do you have any idea what a small slice of the pie that is? It's the unicorn in the room, right?
Yeah, it's a blip. It's like not even a rounding error.
Right. But consumers can change that, right? The more consumers support it, the more it will change and the more it'll grow.
Hopefully, yeah. I mean, there are some criticisms of ROC, like even people that are pro regenerative, like have level criticisms at ROC for being too gold standard. They're like, you know, this is great to have a North Star, but like if we're going to switch acreage at scale, it needs to be a little bit less, you know, gold standard, a little less North Star. And so I see that. I think that's a valid critique, but obviously we want to get to the North Star eventually, right? So I want to focus on my niche, which is already gold standard nut butter, right? And like make it the goldest standard I can. And then maybe in order to scale, like we're probably going to have to like do a little bit less, like maybe we do a silver level, right? So we have our ROC level as gold, we've got our silver level as USDA organic, and then that gives us more market share. And then in order to go from that, you know, like we said, organic is such a small niche, we go from organic to not conventional because we're never going to support that. But what if we go to transitional as like a bronze level, right? So it's functionally de facto organic, managed under the NOP, but it just can't have that organic label yet because it hasn't been 3 years. And so it can't fetch the market premium. So maybe to scale out even to a more wider market, we have like a bronze level certified transitional product line. And then what we're trying to do is create an upward spiral to regeneration, right? From conventional, transitional, organic, regenerative. So I'm playing around with how do we, as we scale it from a business, from niche to mainstream, how do we also bring mainstream to regenerative in that same process?
I think that's also a tough consumer conversation because they don't understand that, you know, either there's a label on it or there's not. And there can be so many differences along the way. And I think that's something we really care about at Regenerative Farmers America is, you know, imperfection is still progress and we're still trying. We may not have that perfect gold certification, but those silver, those bronzes are still improving soil health, retaining water there, making impacts on the earth. So I love that distinction and I love that area. So I'll go ahead with our wrap up question. Where is Philosopher Foods going? What do you hope to see, you know, and what are your thoughts of expansion and, you know, empowering the world to eat better?
Totally. Yeah. So we do want to get into products that are not nut butters, and also products that are nut butters, but maybe not necessarily stone ground, or sprouted, right? So that we can reach more of a market. So as far as nut butters, maybe it's, you know, we're launching like I said, maybe it's an organic nut butter that's not stone ground and not sprouted so that we can reach like a much bigger organic market. And then we maybe launch the same thing in transitional so we can try to get into that conventional and mainstream market. Also, we're looking at, you know, launching just bagged almonds, right? Let's say, because there's already plenty of bagged organic and conventional almonds, we're going to be focusing on bagged regenerative organic certified almonds and coconut shreds, which makes total sense because those are the base level ingredients for our current product anyway. So why not just throw it in a bag instead of doing all this expensive processing and tell the story that way? So we're starting to look at other products that will actually help us scale into being a bigger, more influential player as a regenerative consumer packaged goods company. And currently we are fundraising, so we're trying to grow our market presence and our marketing reach and the number of stores that we're in. And we're getting into Unify. We're getting into that big national distributor. We just sent our first pallet last month. So we're just starting to enter the food system in a bigger way. So for us, it's taking our proof of concept at the small scale and seeing what's the logical extent of that. How big can we make that product line? And then once we max that one out, all right, what's our next product line? And how do we take that to its logical extent? But for us, it's not just about growing for growth's sake to make more money. It's like truly about trying to create an example of a regenerative food business that can be replicated. I don't want to have to be like towing the line on this, right? I want Kraft and General Mills and all these big companies, Hormel. I want every single one of them looking at what we're doing and then copying it, and then becoming a regenerative food business themselves. That way I can just retire and enjoy life, right? But yeah, no, we all know that it's going to be harder to change those behemoths. And so we're going to be initiating that change as a small, nimble, agile, innovative startup that is hell-bent on regenerating people on the planet.
I'll throw in one more bonus question because I just have to ask now. What would be your words of wisdom to somebody who is either a farmer or somebody who just loves this movement and they want to jump in and do a value added product like you do? Because just as a farmer standpoint, it takes all day and all night and every ounce of sanity to produce a regenerative product. And then we have to go market it, sell it, value added. So for somebody who either wants to jump in and support the farmers, what advice would you give them to just starting into that world?
Like for a consumer or for a prospective farmer?
Kind of for either a farmer that wants to value add or for somebody who just is not a farmer, but just wants to help this movement. Value add is such an area that it's underserved in the regenerative world. Somebody who wants to help.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely don't want to give the farmers more work. Like out here in California, there's actually a place called, I believe it's Preserve Kitchens. And so they're a really cool model where they work with farmers who have an excess of whatever crop it is. Say they have a bunch of cucumbers, they want to make pickles. They take it over to Preserve. Preserve's already got this facility set up so that they can, jar and ferment their pickles. So that way, it's like the farmer is getting that value out of their crop that they put all their effort into, but they're not then having to learn how to become a food manufacturer. It's already a facility dedicated to value adding for farmers that exists. So that's up in Sonoma County. That's a really great resource. I think we need that across the whole country, right? Anywhere there's farms, we need to have facilities like that. That way the farmer doesn't need to create a whole nother business. And like, yeah, for people that are buying value-added products, I would say like, yeah, pay the premium, right? Like know what's better about organic, know what's better about regenerative, and ask if you have a company that you like to support. Hey, ask them, hey, why don't you guys try sourcing regenerative? Like I really want to buy some regenerative jam or pickles or whatever it is. Like, can you guys source that? And so I think that's what we're talking about, right? The consumer demand is like as simple as saying, hey, company, I want this. Can you make it? And the more of us that ask that, the more likely they are to make it.
I love it. I think it's fantastic. And thank you for all the farmers that you're empowering and aren't having to go make their second and third companies on top of everything you're doing. We appreciate what you're doing so much. We will drop links so everybody can go out and get the top of the line Gold Star nut butters. And we appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you for your time. And last word I would say is if you are a farmer, make sure you get on the like Kiss the Ground Regenerative Farmers map. That's a good way to put yourself on the map for regenerative. If you are interested in regenerative organic certification, they also have a map. So every time I'm looking to think about a product of like, oh, is there regenerative cashews out there? I go to the ROC's website and check out, oh, okay, there's this supplier in India or this supplier in Thailand. So when you put yourself on the map in that way, it allows us as a producer to come and find you and be like, okay, we're going to buy you so we can make regenerative, blah, blah, blah.
I love it. That's a great way to connect the world, right? We regenerative people got to stick together.
Yep. Put us on the map and then connect the map with the people that are looking for it.
I love it. Thank you so much, Tim. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for your time and thanks for all your great work. Keep it up.